Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to OUAB in the Kitchen. Tonight's theme is about Thanksgiving side dishes, some of the favorites that some of us have at Thanksgiving. We have about 4 different entrees in your meal kit. One of them is not really entrees, but side dishes. One is a wonderful apricot bread pudding. The other one is a tart apple crumble. We also have the streusel topping for the top of that crumble. Then we have some nice, beautifully oven-roasted vegetables, very much of the autumn season. So they're all indigenous to the late autumn and early winter harvest. And then we're going to be doing a really nice gluten-free pumpkin-cranberry bread. So I'm going to start with the apricot bread pudding. In a saucepan that I have, I'm going to put a little heat on it and add the measure of butter. All your kits are set up and have all those ingredients already set up separately. Some of you may have the fennel portion, which we roasted in advance, off to the side because it didn't make it in the kit when we originally started. But for that, you'll see the chopped onion and celery, a couple of whole eggs that I just crack in advance here. This is a nice peach vegetable broth or an apricot vegetable broth, and that apricot I get from international markets. Some Middle Eastern markets, you'll find this dried apricot paste, and that paste, basically all I do is take it in sheets. They come off in sheets, comes like fruit strips you may have had as a kid or you're giving your kids today, only it's much better for us, and it's all pure apricot put into a paste form. It's absolutely delicious for many, many applications. So that's been dissolved in a little bit of vegetable stock. We have heavy creams and julienne cuts of sun-dried apricot, a little bit of a poultry seasoning that you can find in the grocery stores, the roasted fennel we talked about, and some chopped herbs. On another skillet, while that's starting, I'm going to preheat the skillet for the apple crumble. Butter is melted in the saucepan. I'm going to put together the combination of celery and onion that you have in your kit. I'm going to let those start to do their job, and that's going to be to sweat. Not to really get color on them, but just to sweat so they become somewhat translucent. So manage the heat in that application of that saucepan as you move forward. You've got 2 whole apples. It's rare that I have you folks cut things, but the nature of the apple will oxidize very quickly if we were to cut those in advance. So to peel that apple, I typically just take a vegetable peeler, and I'll go around the top, around the crown of the apple, and then I'll go to the bottom of the apple and peel in a circular motion around the bottom, and then I'll just go to the center and just do some quick swipes of the apple to get all the skin off. Now the skin has a lot of nutrition in it. Some folks like it on, some like it off. Most like it off, so I'm taking it off. You might see a couple of bruises on the apple. Don't freak out about it. There's nothing wrong with it. You can take that little bruise out if you like. Some people are very visual, and they will have a hard time with that spot on the apple. The next step, I'm going to do the cut. And for that, I have a claw-shaped hand. I'm going to take the bottom off of each apple, just so that I have a little bit more of a secure surface to work with. And then I'm going to cut close to the core of the apple, and kind of pretty much coming in either 4 parts or 3 parts of that apple. So all I'm discarding is just that seed core in the center of the apple. I'm going to repeat that with the second apple so that I have those pieces of apple, really discarding very little. That could actually be consumed as a snack. I'm going to move back to the celery and the onion. It's starting to sweat. And we want to get it a little bit soft. It's going to continue to cook in the oven under that heat application, so not to worry. Just let it sizzle and simmer in there. On this next step, you have a portion of butter for the apple tart. And I'll let that butter melt down. You can almost let that butter get to the point where it gets a little bit of color, kind of caramelized per se, so that that apple has some nice rich flavor of brown butter on that. So now you can see that I'm simply just slicing each section of the apples into strips. And those strips I'm just going to turn diagonally and to be able to cut those into chunks. You can opt out. Based on the pan you're going to cook these apples in will have a lot to do with how you're going to cut them. But however you cut them, the only recommendation I have that I think is a very high importance is that the apples are very similar in size as you cut them so that they will cook fairly evenly in the oven during that roasting process. So now that the apples are cut, I'm simply going to add them to this nice brown butter. If you were up here and be able to smell it, it's got a wonderful smell of caramelization. It's just absolutely delicious. And having a bit of that brown butter smell, it's going to give you that nice flavor that you anticipate when we have an apple streusel or an apple cobbler, all those various applications that we have in the autumn season for apples. Coming back to the stuffing, we may call it a stuffing, we may call it a bread pudding. I'll call it a bread pudding because of the ingredients that are involved in that. So now that I have the celery and the onion, they're sweat down just enough that I can now add this apricot nectar, which is basically a chicken stock with the dissolved apricot paste involved in that. And I'm going to bring that to a simmer. While that's coming to a simmer, I'm going to whisk these 2 eggs. 2 eggs you have in your kit are just simply going to be homogenized so that they're blended for that next step process for the dish. Almost as if you're making scrambled eggs. There's really no rhythm to that, just making sure that they're broken down and they're not in a clump form. Okay? That's the process for that step. I'm going to come back to the apples and take a look at those. Make sure that they're cooking nice and gently. The ingredients for the apples, you have a little nutmeg, a little cinnamon, some oats, and some brown sugar. I'm going to let these apples pick up a little bit of color before I add the brown sugar. The brown sugar with the liquid from the apples is going to make this nice syrupy consistency of a saucy, per se, of the apples. While that's working, I'm going to make the apple crumble topping. And for that crumble topping, I'm going to take butter. It has to be cold. If the butter's not cold, you're going to have a problem with it turning into what might look like a pie dough. So I'm going to take those little pieces of butter that are cut into cubes and put those into this stainless steel bowl. And to that, I'm going to add the measure of flour. That's step 1. To this, I'm going to take those little pieces of butter, and I'm just going to work them between my index finger and second digit and kind of what we call feathering, or cutting the flour into the butter, cutting the butter into the flour. Either direction, however you say it, what you're doing is getting these nice, very small, thin feathers of butter enrobed in that flour to be able to make this nice little crumble topping. We're going to continue to work that in that same fashion. I can't emphasize enough on how important it is to have the butter cold. If it starts out too warm, you're going to end up making the base 1 of a creamed butter and flour mixture for a cookie dough, and that's not really what we're looking for. So do your best. Keep that butter cold until you're ready to do this step. After you've got these nice feathery shapes that you see here, then we're going to add the brown sugar, and we're going to continue that same process on incorporating the brown sugar into the streusel topping to get it that nice consistency there. I'm going to stir those apples because I can hear them starting to cook, and at this point those apples are picking up a little color. I'm going to add the brown sugar and let it dissolve. Stock has come to a simmer over here for the bread pudding. Here I'm going to add in the dried apricots and let those rehydrate in that simmering stock. At this point I'm going to add in the fennel, the roasted fennel that we prepared in advance, and that measure of poultry seasoning. Very easy to find in the market, in the spice aisle, very easy to see. Once I have that all combined together, I'm going to bring it back to a boil one more time. Not a hard boil, but a slow simmer. Working the brown sugar into the feathered butter and sugar mixture. Once you've achieved a nice, kind of looks like sand, not as fine as sand, but kind of lumpy sand. At that point, you're going to put in your nutmeg and your cinnamon, salt, a little lemon juice, and a little bit of vanilla. All go into this crumble topping. While the apples are cooking, I'm going to add the cinnamon to them and the little bit of nutmeg that we have on your kit. Important thing to remember here is once you add those ingredients, the cinnamon and the nutmeg, at that point fire comes off. You've got those apples tender enough. They started to caramelize. The sugar starts to melt down and create a little syrup, and your apples are ready to go into the vessel. Now you have the option of adding some oatmeal to those, but I'm going to opt out until I finish this crumble topping. And I've added those wet ingredients, which are the vanilla and the lemon juice. Here I want to be very careful that I'm not working that mixture too hard. I'm just simply working the mixture with my fingers so it still is kind of now lumpy. Looks kind of like a pie dough would be before you start to roll it out and to solidify it, or a cookie dough. So that's the process for that. Those are those two steps. Now that I have this stock run to a simmer, I'm going to put in the cubed pieces of seasoned bread, and that's for the bread pudding. It's going to let that bread pudding start to develop with the stock that is in that saucepan, and it's going to absorb all those liquids. After you've got the majority of those liquids absorbed, we're going to put in the heavy cream and let that heavy cream temper with that stock and those vegetables that we have. And once you've got those incorporated fairly well, it's at that point that we're going to put in the beaten egg that we beat at the beginning of the session. Those eggs go in about that time. If you go in too early, you're likely going to be too hot, and you have a risk of breaking the eggs, or what we would refer to as scrambling the eggs. You don't want that to happen. So allow that to incorporate, cool down just briefly, and then we're going to add the mixed herbs for that bread pudding. Really kind of simple. Some folks will ask about, do you put this type of thing inside the bird? I never stuff the bird. It's too risky. It's hard to get the interior of that bird stuffing hot enough without destroying the exterior parts, the very delicate parts of the anatomy of that bird, specifically the breast. It's going to be very, very overcooked by the time you get that stuffing done. Might be tasty, but I always do it on the side. This apricot bread pudding I use for a lot of various dishes: venison, pork, beef, whatever the application might be. To these apples, here's an option for you. If you want to have it a little bit tighter, more like a pie filling, add some oats. In your kit you have some just rolled oats, Quaker brand, just simple rolled oats. Nothing's been done to them. I do that to be able to absorb some of the liquid because they're still retaining a fair amount of liquid in the apple mixture when they bake, and so that absorbs it. You don't lose any of those wonderful flavors from that. Today I prepared a couple of little ramekins that we're going to present the apple mixture in. They can be treated with a little butter to be able to keep it from sticking, but I don't worry about that too much because I usually will serve that and eat it right out of the container itself. And that's why in that recipe sheet I state about how fun and exciting it might be if you were to put a nice scoop of Jenny's Splendid bourbon vanilla ice cream on that dish to make it pretty darn special. So I have the crumble topping set over here on the side. I'm simply going to disperse that on the top of each of these little flan dishes on top of the apple. Keeping that butter cold is essential, and these are going to bake, and this topping is going to get nice and crispy, nice and crunchy, almost like having little bites of cookie dough on that dish. So that's ready to go in the oven. For the bread pudding, I opted today to put the bread pudding into this little bundt pan. What I might do if I was at home, I might use an elongated bowl or a dish to be able to bake this in. But today I thought these might look a little bit more attractive for presentation if I used some type of a molded structure to make these happen. So yes, I did treat the mold, these little bundt pan molds, with a little bit of canola oil just to help keep them from sticking. and just evenly distribute this between 4 portions. This bakes off very nicely. It's a wonderful accompaniment to chicken. As I mentioned, to nice gamey dishes, venison, duck, all work out quite well. Just what I'll do is after I put it in there, I'll just kind of make sure I can see that little center fuse of that to make that work. Now these are going to go in the oven, and as they go in the oven, we're going to work on a couple of other dishes that we have on this side of the demo table. This bakes about 350 degrees. Everything you've got today bakes about 350. I'm going to start with these roasted vegetables. What you have here is a nice medley of vegetables that are from the autumn season. Butternut squash, onion, shallot, parsnip, turnip, a couple of different colors of red bell pepper, then these very interesting colored carrots. They're from heirloom varieties of carrots, all absolutely wonderful. Those are going to go simply into a bowl. And in that bowl, we're going to put a little bit of olive oil and some jalapenos. I kept those jalapenos on the side so that you could decide amongst yourselves as a family or a party of 2 preparing this dish if you wanted those jalapenos in there or not. Simply season that generously with salt and pepper, and then simply toss that. What I'm leaving behind from your kit is some nice kale leaves, some mixed herbs, and some roasted garlic, which are going to go into this mixture at the end. Toss those vegetables to enrobe them with the oil and distribute the salt and pepper nicely for that phase of the dish. Once that's accomplished, right in the oven like the rest of the stuff. Again, 350 oven, really nice, quite simple. The next dish we've got this evening is going to be a very nice pumpkin-cranberry bread. So for that, I'm going to take all the dry ingredients, which is going to be the oats that you have in your kit, just rolled oats, which we processed into a food processor so they become somewhat like a flour per se. Brown sugar is going to go in there next. Then you have baking soda, baking powder, a little bit of salt, some nutmeg. Those are the dry ingredients that I want to put in there first. And you can run this through a sifter, you can put it in a food processor, but I'm not too keen on having to wash a lot of dishes, so I simply used gloved hands to be able to assure that I'm incorporating all those dry ingredients together so they're evenly distributed, especially the leavening agent, baking powder, baking soda. Some of the brown sugar, because it was in the cooler, will clump up a little bit. Just simply break it down so that it's all a nice kind of milled process to that. All right, real simple stuff. Very nice, easy to work with. And to that mixture, that I've got it all incorporated, I'm going to create a little well in the middle of the bowl. And in the middle of the bowl, I'm going to put those 2 eggs. And I just crack them ahead of time to save the agony of having to watch this show too long. And I'm just going to kind of break those eggs up, just so that they're kind of homogenized. We're going to blend all that together anyway, but I try to just kind of break them up. I do that in advance, but I want you to be able to see those 2 eggs. I try to get all that ingredient preparation done in advance so that there's no compromise with time, because I think these videos are good if they're expedited quickly. So now that I've got the eggs broken up, I'm going to go in right behind it with the pumpkin. Pumpkin can be pulled from a puree, from a can, or you can buy the little small pie pumpkins that I see in the market now. Just simply splitting them in half, take out the seeds, roast it upside down, cut side down, and then you can just put them in the oven, usually about 50-55 minutes. And the pumpkin is soft and tender. It's a little lighter in color than this canned pumpkin, but that has a completely different flavor dynamic, really better for you. And then just puree it in a food processor. Now that I've got the pumpkin mixed in with the egg, now I'm going to gently and freely start to work in the remainder of the ingredients, which is going to be a maple syrup. It's going to be a measure of vanilla. And then what I'm going to hold back on is the sun-dried cranberries. I'm not sure if you saw that, but I spilled some of the oil. And with baking, I have to have all those ingredients in there. So I added it. Anyway, moving back to the mixture. Incorporating those wet ingredients into this pumpkin and egg mixture. The neat thing about this particular bread, like you don't get from a lot of other breads, is that it's oats and doesn't have any gluten, so you can't overwork it. It's one of those gifts. You can have the kids do this, and it works out wonderfully. After that's all incorporated, I'm going to put in the sun-dried cranberries we just simply chopped and some roasted salted pumpkin seeds. And those are the ingredients. This is a very easy dish for you to replicate at home. It'll be a lot of fun for either this Thanksgiving holiday or the other holidays we have coming up in the month of December. And even, heck, why not on the 1st of January? We're going to have a new year. COVID will be behind us somewhere in that year ahead. And I think we're all looking forward to that, so we can enjoy our Thanksgiving with families as we move on. I prepared this little pan. Yours may have been treated with the pan spray. If not, simply line it with a little bit of oil. You have a little parchment paper in case there's a spillover on your kit, and just baking it on a tray. If you don't have a tray, simply just use a skillet that's oven proof that can go in the oven. Here I'm just going to put the batter into the loaf pan. This takes a while to bake. It takes almost 50 minutes, sometimes 60 minutes, based on the type of oven you may have. But the ingredient mixture is there. It's adequate to be able to fulfill the need of that one pumpkin bread. And this is a wonderful breakfast cake that you could have, a little bread you could have for breakfast. Heck, you could use it in the afternoon. Jenny's, even though I talk about Jenny's too much, I just think she makes a lot of great flavors of various types of ice creams. And she has a gingerbread cognac that would be fantastic with this pumpkin bread. And not to worry that the alcohol is cooked out, so there's no sweat there about that. So I'm going to put this pumpkin bread in the oven, allow it to bake to go to that 350-degree temperature. And then I'm going to come around and take a look, do a little cleanup of the stations over here, because we're going to finish off this vegetable medley, this nice roasted vegetable medley, with the kale and the roasted garlic. If I put the roasted garlic and the kale in there too early, I'm going to have trouble with the finish, because the kale is going to burn and the garlic is going to burn in that situation. So at that point, I'm going to simply take out the roasted vegetables, because all you're doing is allowing them to pick up some color, to go around the edges, to have this nice golden hue to them, and some nice kind of caramelization to some of the items that have sugar content in them. That could very easily be items like the carrots are going to have sugar content. Parsnips are going to have sugar content. So I've added those herbs, and now the nice kale. Sometimes I'll put French beans or green beans in this mixture. It really just depends. Usually the heat that's still left on the pan and of the vegetables itself will wilt down that kale enough. Now the kale that we find in the grocery store is usually an adult kale. This is a baby kale, and that's why I use that, because it's going to just simply become limp and just lightly blanched from the heat, the residual heat that's on the vegetables itself. So you can see a little bit of color from the jalapeno peppers and those various ingredients that we have there on that particular dish. I'm going to put it back in the oven just for a moment to be able to bring it back up to temperature before we present it. So now, coming out of the oven, I have the bread puddings. That's going to be about 45 minutes or so, based on the pan you cook them in. This one was done in advance just to be able to expedite the time. And so I let them cook till they were nice and golden, run a pick through it just like you would any other type of a bread. pick comes out clean, you're good to go. At that point, just kind of pop them out, and if everything goes smoothly, they'll come out of the bundt pan, and you have these lovely little pieces of bread pudding, which could go very nicely on a side dish for you and your guests. And we'll just simply plate those. But it's a wonderful bread pudding that's not often used, but I think all those flavors work out really nicely together. I think they're wonderfully dynamic. I love to accent garnish things, so I'm going to put a little bit of parsley in one, a little bit of rosemary in another, because it is a savory bread pudding. We think about bread pudding, a lot of times we think about the sweet side of the universe, whereas today it's a very nice application of savory type food products. So we'll come back and take a look at that after we get the rest of our dishes up and running for the final. I'm going to move on to the apple tart. 40 minutes goes by and it comes out of the oven. And it has a nice golden color to it. You can cook it in the oven as long as you wish based on the color you want it to be. And in your kit you have a very small container. It says PS or powdered sugar on it. And I just simply dust those to give them a much more appealing look to that. And I'd like to serve them warm if I can. You can reheat them in the microwave the next day. It really is up to you and how you want to serve that. But that's the second of these wonderful dishes that we have here this evening. Next, I'm going to go to the pumpkin-cranberry bread that we have. And that came out of the oven. This was actually, in this oven that I have here in the instructional kitchen, was about 55 minutes until I got the pick that you have in your kit. I just simply drop it in the middle. I also look for it to rise up and to have a little bit of cracking at the top. Then I know it's in pretty good shape. So now I've got that nicely cooked. It's beautiful. I like to dust that because it's kind of not very attractive with that brown, all dark brown color. So I dust that nicely with some powdered sugar. If you don't have one of these, you probably don't. A little sifter like this, putting the sugar in the sifter and just tapping it, you have that little snowfall that you see on a lot of shows and stuff like that. So for this, we're simply going to plate that pumpkin bread with a few slices of the pumpkin bread. And again, this would be lovely in the morning if you got time to drive to Starbucks and get a pumpkin latte. That's very harmonious in the flavors of this particular dish. So it would be really kind of fun to have that for the breakfast meal period as a nice pumpkin cranberry bread. They'd be wonderful to make for the holidays, whether you send it to a neighbor or you just take it home and eat it yourself. It's really up to you. I think it's a great dish to have pretty much any time of year. It's going to work out good. So now that we have the vegetables are all nicely roasted, good color on them, and they have the kale has wilted down. This to me, I state that it's a portion for 2 or 3, although not me, man. I'm going to eat that whole thing because I love vegetables, especially these types of vegetables. This time of year is my favorite time of year for vegetables. Even though there's great vegetables being grown in the summer season, in the spring, autumn vegetables I just think are so much more rich in flavor. There's just something about them I just absolutely adore. So butternut squash, turnips, parsnips, roasted carrots. You can use all yellow carrots or all gold carrots or all red carrots, whatever your choice is and what you can get at the market wherever you go. So to finish, we'll take a look at these dishes. We've got the pumpkin bread, the roasted vegetables, the apricot fennel bread pudding, and this lovely tart apple crisp. And that is our OUAB in the kitchen with some fave dishes from the Thanksgiving holiday season. Hopefully you enjoy. Hope to see you again in the spring. Take care. Have great holidays.